stories of supernatural encounters in Ubers seem more common than we might imagine. From drivers to passengers, many share chilling accounts of moments when reality seemed to slip out of control. One of the most sinister stories comes from Mexico, where a driver lived through an experience he would never forget. It was an ordinary work night. The driver had just picked up a passenger and was following the GPS, which indicated a route he had never taken before. At first, he wasn't concerned. After all, GPS doesn't always lead along familiar paths. But as they progressed, the scenery began changing in an unsettling way. Both sides of the road were lined with tombstones, as if they were driving through the middle of a cemetery. The driver felt a chill and noticed that the passenger, seated in the back, was also unusually quiet. Soon, a thick fog began to rise, swallowing the road in seconds. It was so dense that the driver could barely see ahead. The sense of discomfort intensified. He slowed down as the tombstones around them disappeared into the mist. But then, sounds emerged. First, they heard the distant whistle of a train. The sound echoed through the fog, seeming to draw closer and closer, as if a train was about to cross their path, despite there being no tracks around. Then came other noises. The driver and passenger heard what sounded like elephants trumpeting, mixed with muffled and eerie human screams, as if echoed from another time or dimension. The scene turned into a real nightmare, where each sound brought a fresh wave of fear. In the height of his desperation, the driver reached for his phone and tried calling emergency services, but there was no signal. Neither he nor the passenger could make contact. Their phones seemed useless in that place. That was when they both realized they needed to get out of there as fast as possible. With his heart racing and his hands shaking, the driver decided to throw caution to the wind and press down hard on the accelerator. The fog seemed endless. Even at high speed, the feeling of being trapped in that ghostly environment lingered. But finally, after a few minutes, the mist began to clear. The terrifying sounds also faded, replaced by the silence and darkness of the road. Relieved, they spotted a small illuminated bakery up ahead and decided to stop. Inside the bakery, still trying to make sense of what had just happened, the driver and passenger ordered a glass of water and began recounting their story to the manager, who appeared familiar with that kind of tale. The manager listened intently and then shared a revelation that left them both with goosebumps. He explained that decades ago, a freight train used to pass through that region. This train carried people and, intriguingly, also transported circus animals, including elephants. However, on one fateful night, the train derailed on a dangerous curve, resulting in the deaths of many passengers and the animals on board. The accident was so severe that it became a local legend. According to the manager, on misty nights, it was not uncommon for drivers and passers-by to report hearing screams, the train's whistle, and the trumpeting of elephants, echoes of a tragic past, frozen in time. Upon hearing this, the driver and passenger exchanged shocked glances. Everything made sense now. They had not simply crossed an abandoned road. They had passed through a fragment of the past, where the souls of those who perished seemed trapped, eternally replaying the final moments of their lives. The experience was so intense that the driver swore never to take that route again, especially on misty nights. For the passenger, the night would become a haunting memory, a story he would retell in detail, though few might believe him. It was dawn when the driver received a notification for a new ride. He was already tired, but the pickup point was nearby, and the night seemed calm. When he arrived, he saw the passenger waiting in front of a dark house with few lights around. The woman was young, well-dressed, and had a polite appearance. She seemed ready for some special event, or perhaps returning from one. As soon as she entered the car, she greeted him courteously. The driver began the journey and noticed that the passenger was extremely reserved, only responding briefly and keeping her gaze fixed on the window. A few minutes into the trip, a strong odor started filling the car. At first, the driver didn't think much of it, assuming it came from outside, as they were passing through a neighborhood known for being dangerous and with abandoned areas. But the smell became increasingly intense and strange. It was an odor he couldn't quite identify. somewhere between rotten and chemical. The driver opened the window a little, attempting to dispel the smell without seeming rude, but the odor persisted inside the car, as if it were emanating from a specific spot. However, the passenger didn't seem bothered and remained silent, looking outside. After a while, she asked to be dropped off in an isolated area. The driver found it strange, as the place was practically deserted, with no movement or open businesses nearby. There was only an abandoned train platform, faintly illuminated by the distant light of a street lamp. Nevertheless, he stopped the car as requested. The woman thanked him, got out, and walked slowly toward the train platform. The driver remained parked for a moment, intrigued. He watched the woman walk away until she disappeared into the darkness, vanishing on the platform without a trace. There was no one there to meet her, not even the sound of footsteps or voices, just silence. As the driver prepared to leave, he noticed the strange smell still lingered in the car. He looked around, trying to identify its source. The odor now seemed even stronger, almost unbearable. Unsure of what to do, he decided to inspect the back seat. It was then, while running his hand along the floor, that he felt something unusual, a small, soft and damp bundle. When he pulled the object up, he was met with a disturbing sight. Wrapped in dirty stained cloths, he found what looked like a small fetus. The sight was shocking. The putrid smell suddenly made sense. He remained motionless for a few seconds, unable to believe what he was seeing, trying to understand how that had appeared in his car. Gradually, terror took over. Could it be possible that the woman had left it there intentionally? But why would she do that? Amidst the fear and confusion, he looked around, trying to see if she was still nearby, but the platform remained empty, engulfed in darkness. Feeling nauseated and terrified, the driver didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone and called the police, reporting what he had found and where the woman had exited the car. He could barely organize his thoughts. Everything felt like a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. Shortly after, the police arrived at the scene and inspected the car, confirming the presence of the fetus. The driver recounted everything he remembered about the passenger, describing how she had seemed normal and polite, but the subsequent investigation only added more mystery. No woman matching that description was found, and the address where he had picked her up was unregistered anywhere. The driver spent days trying to understand what had happened, but he never found answers. 3 friends in Sacramento decided to call an Uber to get home after an exciting night out. It was early morning, and the streets were practically deserted. They laughed and chatted, still caught up in the night's energy, when the driver arrived. He seemed calm, just waved and confirmed the destination on the app. The friends got in, unaware that the ride would turn into a terrifying experience. At first, everything was normal. The driver followed the route and drove calmly, but a few minutes later, he began to speed up. The silence inside the car was broken when one of the friends noticed he was ignoring the GPS directions, taking different routes, turning onto deserted and eerie streets. When one of them alerted him about the detour, he remained silent, completely ignoring their questions. The speed increased, and the tension in the car grew with each passing second. The friends began exchanging glances, confused and frightened. When one of them asked him to slow down, the driver finally broke his silence. But his words were even more chilling. Instead of explaining what he was doing, he yelled in a cold, threatening voice, "You're not getting out of this car tonight. We're all going to die." The phrase made the air inside the car freeze. The friends were paralyzed, trying to understand what was happening. The driver, his eyes fixed on the road, pressed even harder on the accelerator, pushing the car to a terrifying speed. One of the friends, in desperation, reached for her phone to try calling someone, but the driver saw the movement in the rearview mirror and, in a sudden impulse, struck her phone violently, knocking it to the floor. The tension turned to panic. He kept shouting incoherent phrases, talking about death and insisting that no one would leave alive. The friends realized they were at the mercy of a man completely out of control, and adrenaline took over. Then, another one of them, trying to mask her fear, discreetly picked up her phone and silently dialed the police, hoping the driver wouldn't notice. She kept the phone hidden as the call connected, praying that the dispatcher would pick up on the distress call. The ride seemed endless. Every high-speed turn, every sharp corner, amplified the terror they felt. On the phone, the friend whispered as much information as she could, trying to give street names. But every time the driver yelled, the atmosphere became more threatening. His face looked like a mask of rage, devoid of any humanity. Finally, the car stopped at a traffic light. The friends exchanged glances, and without a word, they knew this was their only chance to escape. The second the car stopped, they unlocked the doors and bolted, running desperately. They didn't look back until they reached a brightly lit gas station further up the road. There, they finally felt safe enough to explain what had happened to the employees, who quickly called the police. Within minutes, authorities arrived at the station and the friends recounted every detail of the ride. They were shaken but relieved to have escaped. However, what they would discover next made the ordeal even more terrifying. When the friends reported the incident to the app's support, they received information that made them question the reality of the situation. The driver who had taken them that night shouldn't have been active. He had been officially terminated from Uber months before, with no permission to drive or take rides. There was no record of the trip in the system, and the driver's profile no longer existed on the platform. The experience was a mystery. How had he managed to access the system and accept the ride? The car that took them that night seemed to come from a dark place, a nightmare that had seeped into reality. The friends spent days trying to forget the incident, but the memory of that driver's face, his threatening words, and the sense of imminent danger would never fade. That driver, with his death threats and insane gaze, remained an enigma. After a night of partying, Tiago decided to open Tinder while waiting for an Uber to take him home. Amidst several profiles, he matched with a woman named Alicia. She was beautiful, and the conversation quickly became light and fun. Shortly afterward, Alicia surprised him with a direct invitation to come to her place. Without a second thought, he accepted and excitedly asked the driver to change the destination, thrilled at the prospect of an unexpected encounter. The driver was friendly, and Tiago, in high spirits, started sharing about his lucky night. He explained that he was going to meet someone he had just matched with on Tinder. The driver just listened, but as Tiago mentioned Alicia's address, he noticed the driver becoming visibly more serious. When they finally turned onto the street where her house was, the driver couldn't contain his tension any longer. He turned to Tiago and warned, "Are you sure you want to go to this place?" Tiago, surprised, asked why the driver was questioning him. That's when the driver, in a worried tone, revealed that he knew that house. Weeks earlier, he had taken another passenger to the same address, a man who was also going to meet a woman. However, that passenger was never seen again. Days later, the driver heard that someone had been found brutally murdered in that very house. The driver's words left Tiago in shock. What seemed like an innocent Tinder date now began to feel like a trap. Unsure of how to react, Tiago asked the driver to slow down and watch the house as they approached. The facade was partially obscured by darkness and looked run down, with broken windows and an abandoned appearance. Then Tiago saw something that made his blood run cold. In one of the windows, a shadowy figure seemed to be peering through the curtains. The face was almost invisible, only the contours standing out, but he could make out a pair of dark eyes staring directly at the car. The figure appeared motionless, yet its presence was menacing, as if it were waiting for something or someone. Tiago swallowed hard and looked at the driver, who already had his foot on the accelerator, ready to leave. Without a second thought, Tiago asked the driver to turn around and get out of there immediately. The driver didn't hesitate. In seconds, they were far from the house, and the tension in the car was palpable. Tiago looked back, checking if the figure was still there, but the house had already vanished in the distance. On the way back, the driver tried to reassure Tiago, though he himself seemed shaken by what had happened. As they drove, Tiago couldn't stop thinking about Alicia. He grabbed his phone and opened Tinder, but her profile was gone. The photo, the messages, her name, everything had disappeared, as if it had never existed. Tiago tried to make sense of what had happened, but nothing added up. Who was the shadowy figure he saw in the window? And why would Alicia invite him to a place like that? Already at home, he found himself questioning if this person really existed, or if it was a trap set by someone with dangerous intentions. It was a quiet night in Malaysia, and an Uber driver was finishing his shift when he received a last ride request. The pickup location was near the Mount Erskine Cemetery, a place he avoided when possible, especially at night. Even so, he accepted the ride. The passenger's name was Joey, and according to the app, she was already waiting. When he arrived at the indicated spot, the driver noticed the deserted surroundings. There were no signs of movement or anyone who looked like they were waiting for a car. He checked the app again, confirmed the location, but still nothing. Only the cemetery, shrouded in a heavy, deep darkness. He decided to wait a few minutes, thinking the passenger might be late or on her way. However, time passed and Joey didn't show up. Intrigued and tired, he decided to proceed. Breaking protocol, he started the ride without a passenger, hoping Joey would appear along the route or reach out during the trip. As he drove a few meters, something strange happened. The destination on the app, which indicated a farther location, suddenly marked the ride as complete as if he'd arrived. The driver stopped the car and looked around. He felt a chill as he realized he was parked just a few meters from the cemetery. Somehow, the ride had ended there, in the middle of the darkness, without him actually traveling the indicated distance. Confused, he restarted the app and checked the recorded route. But the most unsettling part was that the route shown on the app wasn't the one he remembered driving. The traced path showed turns and detours he hadn't taken, winding through parts of the city he hadn't passed. He tried to rationalize it, thinking the system must have glitched, but the eerie feeling only grew. Determined to leave as quickly as possible, the driver turned back the way he had come. The cemetery and the trees surrounding it seemed to be cloaked in a light mist, and a sense of a presence followed him as he moved away. On the way back, he felt the car growing heavier, as if someone was sitting in the back seat. Every time he glanced in the rearview mirror, he expected to see something unusual, but the seat remained empty. At the end of his shift, the driver shared the story with his friends. Some laughed, but others looked concerned, suggesting he might have transported a ghost passenger. Between laughs and cautious glances, they told stories of people who, when passing by the Mount Erskine Cemetery at night, claimed to hear footsteps and see shadowy figures disappearing among the trees. Days later, he discovered that the name Joey was often associated with an old local legend. According to some, a young woman named Joey had lost her life near the cemetery, and her spirit is said to wander, calling out for help.